Top 5 WTF moments of the Pac-12 collapse. Or WTH, if you'd rather me soften it. Whatever. Emory's in charge. I send him things, and then he makes the graphics he wants to make. He has a lot of work to do, so I don't get in his way.
He makes graphics, and he knows things.
Yes, that's what he does. I'm not getting in his way. He's the Oklahoma Wild man. That's all I know. Number 5, the unity statements. And these go back as far as, February. We're like, everything's going fine. And that was the first time I really thought, I started to seep into my head that maybe they won't get something done. Because I always thought, if you apply any kind of sports media logic to a unity statement, okay, we're all together, this is great, we plan on getting this TV deal done. Every time you hear that, it puts doubt in your head when it's, we stand behind our head coach 100%. We're happy that coach so-and-so is here with us and doing, so-and-so football and leading our young men in a way that we're proud of. And that is, I don't want to answer questions about this, so I will send out an email. And anytime that someone makes a statement that they refuse to answer questions about, that means that there needs to be questions asked. And this is what the Pac-12 somehow failed to realize, that if you issue a statement because you don't want to ask questions or answer questions, then you're going to make people want to ask more of them. And that was the first thing that happened. And he kind of came out we think it's going fine. And then to come to find out, they never saw anything until last week. They never actually saw anything. And to me personally, where I would have gotten panicked was probably right after that first unity statement when it said, well, this has been going on since July. We should have at least seen something, right, George? Seen something?
No, go ahead.
I think, one, message is fine. 2, it's okay, we probably don't need more than this. When you're on statement 4 and people can put a collage together like they did last week with the 4 statements or 5 statements that have come out, I think it's 4, then, it's just ridiculous. I mean, you should never have to issue more than 1 statement of unity, much less 2, and never 4 or more, which they ended up doing. And I don't know. I mean, I can kind of understand why they did it at the time, but you had to know then, right, that wasn't going to be another 6 months later and you still weren't going to have it. There's no way they did that thinking that was a realistic possibility, right? That 6 months later they would have to issue their 4th unity statement and still wouldn't have a TV deal to speak of or one that's worth mentioning in any really great detail. That was I just don't think they ever had a full grasp on how they were portrayed and what the thought process was, because there's still arrogance going on now. We have to join it's do you realize the position you're in? Do you still not realize after all of this? And I guess along the way, clearly they didn't realize, and we were the idiots that were talking about their demise. And the statement solved everything. I mean, those were not done properly. For sure.
A lot of times it's the people on the outside who ask the best questions because you've never thought of it before. So you say something and say something and say something, and you're like, this is our thinking. And then somebody asks you what is a pretty simple question, and you go, oh, crap.
Right.
I did not think of that. That is a good point. Or in this case of the Pac-12, people were asking them good questions, and they're like, we're fine. We're fine.
Trust us.
Yeah. Number 4, Colorado getting the ball rolling. And this to me is a shocking moment in only the fact that Colorado was by far the worst team in the Pac-12 over the long haul of them being, their 12 years in the conference didn't return a lot of things. And the team that undid the Pac-12 ultimately and pulled the final string and started that was the worst team in it. I mean, that is saying how
that's what I'm saying. Remember last week I brought up Rick George, what he has done in 8-9 months with Dion, and then getting this done is remarkable.
But how far you've fallen as a conference when the team that should have no juice in making decisions on what's going on outside of their vote is the one who's like, you know what? We haven't been good in this league, and this doesn't make sense to us.
Yeah, this would have been like KU pre-Leipold, post-Mangino, being the card that pulled the entire deck down, except for the fact that they've actually got a great basketball program, which Colorado doesn't even have that. So, I mean, for the the bottom of the standings team to be the one that brought the whole house down is pretty crazy. But it's also very fitting because what were they before they were Pac-12? They were a Big 12 team, and so in reality, they're just coming back home where they were before. But yeah, Colorado, without them sticking their neck out and doing that on their own, not really telegraphing it all that much, but just kind of like one day Rick George is saying this, the next day he's leaving a meeting early, and then 2 days later or whenever it was, they're out of there entirely. Yeah, the four corners don't come together without the Buffaloes, so they deserve an immense amount of credit for being the first to make the move and not know what was coming afterwards, but just doing it on their own, and then we saw what followed.
Yep. Number 3, George Kliavkoff's performance at Media Days. This was, by all intents and purposes, and all like any review of this, like it was just bad. This wasn't like one of the things that you could. It's not like a movie where I can like it and Smoak, you won't like it, and it's divided evenly. Of like, this
like
wasn't
Barbie.
for me. Like I'll tell you, Barbie was
it.
not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Oh my god!
But yeah, there's just those things. But this was one of those. If you were giving a performance review of George Kliavkoff, I had to come in and say, hey, we got to talk about Media Days here. If you don't have a deal, it's okay to say that we're not there yet, as opposed to think that you have one and everybody's ready to go, and then kind of saying we're trying to focus on football today. Well, you're not Lincoln Riley. Nobody's here to ask you about the spread offense versus the veer.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to ask you if if USC's defense is better. This is what you're here to talk about. So, those things were bad, and that's where. You were gone that Friday. Craig and I were on, and I just said, look, I don't know what's going to come out of this. And, it's in the eye of the beholder, like Craig said that day, but this was not good. This was not a, come on for more, like the lighters and bring him on for an encore. It's get him off stage fast.
Say whatever you like about the whole way, but I tried to be the one that gave them the benefit of the doubt. I trusted the reporting out west. Hey, they know better than I do, right? Like, this can't be as bad as it looks. They'll get a TV deal together. This is all going to work itself out. And so much for that. Kind of going back to our conversation from a few minutes ago. The reporting out there, the words out there from him or Robbins or whoever else was one thing, and reality was entirely different. Reality was actually what the people over here were talking about the entire time, is what it turned out to be.
Well, we'd all been through it. That's the other thing, is why we've all seen it. We've all experienced it and seen it. And, just watching from afar going, this looks very familiar.
Yeah, I gave him the benefit of that, just thinking, okay, well, surely he's up there knowing how important this was. Like, there has to be something in his back pocket. And the fact that there wasn't, I just thought that people in positions of power like that were a bit smarter than that. And as we've come to realize from various, circles of life, like, that's not always the case. The person in power is not always the mastermind that you think so. And that was certainly the case here. I gave way too much credit in certain areas that didn't deserve it. And I still cannot believe that they actually walked up all the way to Media Days after this entire year of discussion and still didn't really have anything with meat on the bones to present to its schools, and that's why we are where we are, and no other reason really other than that, because we all know, had you been able to secure something, this would have been an entirely different story.
Yeah.
And to get to Media Days was just crazy.
And then we want to talk about football. He had no answers. He talked about the longer they wait. Obviously, none of that was true, because nobody wanted to talk about football when the commissioner of a conference that has all this historical value, et cetera, was drowning, and he just blew it.
Yeah. Number 2, the Big Ten poking their head back in. Where they're out of this, right? They were out of this the whole time. And it stood to reason that, look, there's some logistical nightmares here. Dan Wetzel said earlier, it's pretty funny that, one of the Big Ten ADs says, we can't even land our plane in Eugene. We've got to figure those things out. The airport won't fit us.
First world problems, baby.
737. But yeah, that's absolutely that. But yeah, and then all of a sudden, they planted the seed. Of course, they started the downfall, taking out the LA schools a year ago, and then just waited for the building to crumble. They pulled out a corner brick, and then the Pac-12 thought, we'll get to that. That'll be fine. And then just waited for the rest of the house to crumble and people to get shaky. And as soon as they could, they went and took the wrecking ball to it.
Yeah, I mean, it was no secret, really, if you follow Realignment stuff on, social media, the various articles, especially post-OU Texas, post-USC, UCLA, like, what's next? What's the big domino to fall? And the big one that everybody kind of pointed to or suggested was, is the Big Ten done out west? Or, what about Oregon and Washington? And that seemed like before, Colorado suddenly made their decision, like it was a far-off scenario. The Big Ten was saying what they were saying, not really interested. But sure enough, all it took was the right couple of levers being pulled, and the Big Ten was waiting quietly, and they can claim we didn't do anything, but they were ready to go when the time came, and I don't think that's any coincidence. So yeah, they were lying in wait. That's why the Big Ten's the Big Ten, the SEC is the SEC, is the moves that they've made over time, right? And they played it perfectly of like, we're not going to be the disruptor, but if disruption comes, we'll be there to feast, just like Brett Yormark. We want the fourth corner schools. If not, we'll pivot. But if they're there, we'll take them. And that's kind of what ended up happening as a result with Big Ten and Oregon and Washington as well.
And the number one biggest WT whatever moment, the fake resurrection. Oh, hey, everybody's come together. This is great. Hey, no, we've figured it out. Like, everybody was stressed out of their conference calls last night. Things were said. Emotions were running high.
The worst thing they did was have people, presidents, and Robbins was asked by Kliavkoff to would you go out there and talk to Dennis Dodd, the show unity? Every time they did, Schultz, whoever. Like you said, remember, I forgot who it was that, like, laughed at a Dennis Dodd report.
Harlan.
It was Mark Harlan.
At Utah. They were trying to show us like a strong amount of unity, and yet all of them were on the phone or talking to Brett Yormark in the Big 12. At least 6 or 8 of those schools.
But again, that Friday morning, like, oh man, they're going to get together and sign a grant of rights.
I was like, my God, today's going to be amazing, the turnaround.
And they fed it out to McMurphy and Thamel and the people who have been on this right the whole time. And maybe they honestly thought that, but clearly, when they got there, and we've heard this story from several different presidents, is that they hit the button on the Zoom and they're like, Oregon, you guys, Oregon. Is somebody in Oregon? Do they know that they're not on this? And then it became clear, like, oh no, they're very intentionally not on this.
The ones that reported that were Thamel, Mark Murphy, and Dellinger. And all of them had been the ones that had been hammering away at the changes that were about to happen. That was very much interesting. And there was even Brett McMurphy, who's been really hard on what's been going on with the big Pac-12. You're right.
Yeah. Oregon's not in it. Washington, your camera's not on. Washington, can you put your camera on? You guys, you here?
I wasn't following this live as it was unfolding that morning. I got it after the fact, and I'm kind of glad that I did, because that would have been a roller coaster of emotions. I'm sure it was for a lot of people of like, oh my gosh, they're actually going to salvage this. And no, instead, it all falls apart in a matter of, I guess, minutes, hours, whatever it ended up being, a very short amount of time. But, yeah, it seemed there for a second like the coast was clear. You're just going to lose Colorado. And as we know all too well now, that is not the case. And how much longer will that logo even be active? That's the question, or one of the big questions that's remaining at this point.
It's going to be on one of those T-shirt sites.
What?
Like, you can get like vintage T-shirts of old minor league baseball teams.
Yeah. There's one